Rhodri Jones.
Hiya.
Hiya. Listening to you speak this morning was both inspirational and a kind of opening up of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think you lay yourself open, you tell the truth as it is.
As I see it,
As you see it. Does that polemic, it obviously comes from the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So what drives that sort of, those ideas? What's brought you to that point?
I don't really know. I mean, I've always been passionate about what I do. As a kid, I was lucky enough to sing. I sang in Bangor Cathedral Choir, which was a very sissy thing to do, but I loved the music. And that music was actually inspirational, you know, singing Bach in a beautiful building, or singing Mozart, or singing Handel, or Purcell, and in a group. Yeah. And I was lucky enough to be chosen to sing in different cathedrals in the UK. I sang in Canterbury Cathedral, in Bath Abbey, in Worcester. And there you were. I'm not a religious person. I wasn't even as a kid. But there you were, feeling all these chills going down your spine. In these beautiful spaces, and you were actually making music with other people, and so that certainly brought out something that was obviously there. I come from Wales. I'm proud of it. I come from Bethesda originally. I went to Bethesda school. This is one thing I think that I do have in common with Philip, and we used to talk about this quite a bit, because we come from, you know, a culture which has been shat on. We have a certain way of looking at things which is different, you know, and you tend to be able to understand the position of people who are also disadvantaged in some ways, and be more open to that. Now, it's also a question of personality, I guess. I am passionate about what I do. And that is an incredibly privileged situation to be in. I'm 52 years old. I got into photography in my mid-20s.
What was the drive to push you into photography?
Travel. Okay, because I did loads of different jobs. I worked as, you know, in a chemical laboratory. I've worked as a joiner. I worked as an electrician. And I started doing lights for gigs and for theatre. You know, I was a light tech. And I used to climb as a kid, so I was very happy doing, you know, rigging and stuff. Yeah. And I'd save money. And then can I say it, fuck off to Africa and South America, and then I basically just wanted to do a job which allowed me to travel. And I got into the photography while I was traveling, because it meant that it was an excuse to be more curious.
Yes.
To talk with people and say, well, listen, actually, I'm taking photographs. That's why I'm curious. Yeah. Is it okay if I hang around and do my thing?
Yeah.
And so that was, you know, the initial thing. And then I kind of, once I decided that's what I wanted to do, I was kind of politically inclined and everything. I went off to Nicaragua. I picked up some press passes from Camera Press. I went up to Sexta Región, where the Contra were. I took some photos up there, and then I went down to Managua. I went to Agencia Nueva Nicaragua, which is the Sandinista press agency. Yeah. And I said, well, listen, you know, I can be in places in your country that you find it difficult to be in. Yeah. Are you going to hire me? And they said, yeah, you know, he's a dumb kid. So I was getting $150 for risking my life. And then there were the elections soon after that.
Yes.
And because I was working for Nueva Nicaragua, I was in a privileged situation. I was right up with Daniel Ortega. I'm embarrassed about it now. I mean, he seemed like to be a good guy at the time. He turned out as a bastard, but it was a really privileged situation. I was shooting with 28 mils, 24 mils, and the rest of the press guys were, 40 meters away, and I was right up close. So, and that's how it started.
When you travel, languages can always be about, you're a linguist.
Well, not really. No. I pick up, because of the music, and because I was brought up with 3 languages,
yes.
I have a distinct advantage in learning new languages or picking up enough to survive.
Yeah.
Because music, it does make you use these 2 things on the side of your head.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't describe myself as a linguist, no.
But when you were in Nicaragua, you made friends.
Yeah.
And those friendships have lasted a long time, and they're reflected in your photography because you're still photographing some of those.
Well, less Nicaragua. I haven't been back to Nicaragua.
Oh, right.
I haven't been back to Nicaragua. Part of it was like the whole disappointment of where, the Sandinistas went.
Yes.
Actually, even when I was in Central America, I found what was happening in El Salvador much more interesting, because the FMLN didn't just get power easy. It was a longer process, and there was more discussion within the groups, etc. And my first major project on social documentary, I guess, it was the Albania project. Yeah. And with those people, yes, I've kept in contact. I mean, the little picture of the baby, Michele.
Yeah.
There's a whole load of stuff involved in blood feuds and that. And so I sponsored for Michele to come over to Italy because his family had been in a blood feud, and I wanted to get the kid out. Because otherwise he'd have been a target. And I followed him through, and I've kept in contact with several of the families.
Right. How has situation changed in the area that you were photographing and the people you photographed?
Well, it's a process which has happened all over. Most of those communities have almost disappeared. During the communist regime, Enver Hoxha's regime in Albania, you couldn't just live where you wanted to. You had to live in certain areas. And these particular people, being Catholics, they had been particularly, targets of the regime. They weren't trusted by the regime. And it was almost like they were in an internal exile. And so they couldn't move from those communities. And these communities are in around several mountains. Yes. And the access is very difficult. The trucks would get up to 3 hours walk, and then it's mule tracks, So obviously these people don't want to hang around in these places, especially the youth. When things started, opening up, they wanted to move. I left North Wales as a kid of 18 because I wanted to see the big wide world. Imagine being stuck up on a mountain in Albania.
So I was really interested in looking at some of those some of those photographs from Albania, because I can actually relate to some of those photographs. Not that I've ever been to Albania, but I was looking at photographs that were taken during the 50s in North Pembrokeshire, and all these people dressed in black, and they are locked into the Christianity of that area. It's a small area of Pembrokeshire, but the devotion you see in their faces and in the way they live and dress is remarkable, really. And I suppose, I don't know, it was like going to Nepal, and you see things as they were, and it's like moving back in time almost.
Well, I found that. I did mention in my talk this morning that there was very little kind of unpoliticized reading material to be had. And one of the books that I found was by one of these Edwardian travelling ladies, a lady called Edith Durham.
Oh, yes.
And she travelled a lot in these areas and wrote a book about it, High Albania.
Yeah.
I managed to find a copy of this book, and I obviously read it, and it was remarkable how much stuff hadn't changed in almost 100 years.
Yeah.
And one of the chapters of that book was called "The Land of the Living Past."
Wow.
Now that was said 100 years ago, and that project, I initially called it "The Land of the Living Past," taking that title, because it was for me. A step back into time. I mean, it's horrible to use these, catchy phrases, but it was almost like a human Jurassic Park, What was fascinating was these people had been isolated not only for the 50 years of the Hoxha regime, they'd been isolated for 5 centuries previous to that, because they'd been a Catholic enclave in the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottomans had kind of decided, okay, we're not going to get much money out of these people. They're poor as shit, and they can't pay taxes. So the agreement they had was these people can actually govern themselves, and the only thing they have to do is give us troops to fight the Serbs. Albanians and Serbs like killing each other. They have done for centuries. So the Albanians were kind of happy. And they had this oral code, which would pass orally from generation to generation, which governs, it's called the Kanun of Lek Dukhajin. Lek Dukhajin was a kind of a rebel leader against the Ottomans. But actually, this code, this Kanun, this canon, probably started out much earlier, even in antiquity, and obviously developed over time, because laws develop in all communities and all cultures. But they were using this to govern everything from distribution of land, water, which is fundamental, obviously, in agricultural communities, marriages, and also this thing about the faida, the feuds. Now, when the Hoxha regime collapsed, there was a kind of an empty space of power. Yeah, there was like it was a free for all, and these people went back to the Kanun, which had been suppressed during Hoxha's time, as something to cling on to. So it was almost like a rediscovery of their roots and using it again. And it was obviously not working for this day and age. So there was a lot of conflict there. But that was an incredibly interesting thing to see, how people were coming to terms with, oh shit, we're going to have to develop our own way, our own culture, in a very short period of time to make sense. And there are not that many places where you can see that in the world. So it was a hugely privileged situation to be in. And it took me a while actually to realize that. And I'd go back to these communities and they would appreciate that. And after a time, it wasn't just because I was giving them free photos of all their weddings and funerals and stuff, They realized that what I was doing was important for their culture as well. I was documenting a particular time, but it was important for them. And that meant, and they trusted me, and that meant I was in a hugely privileged situation.
It was interesting when in your talk you said that you were curious about them and they were curious about you.
Yeah.
What was their curiosity about you? What did they want to know about you?
Well, I was the first Westerner to be in that area since the Second World War. And so, what had happened at the end of the Hoxha regime, Hoxha died and then there was another guy who took over, they started kind of opening up slightly. And they started watching Italian TV. And it was incredible because you had these people who had learnt Italian only from watching TV.
God, right.
And their Italian was good.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, TV actually works for learning a language. So their kind of perspective of what life was like in the West was Italian TV. Now, I don't know how much Italian TV you've seen, but I'm not saying it's quite as bad as Brazilian soap operas, but I mean, there is a lot of imagination there. So they were thinking, you know, this is...
Yeah.
Wow, that's what life is like there. And obviously it isn't. You know?
Yeah.
So they were interested also in seeing somebody who, you know, I when I got back from Central America, I still had more or less my political views. I mean, they had varied quite a bit because actually working for a regime, you see stuff happening and you're thinking, oh. But I was still saying, well, what was the problem with corporatization and stuff? And then they were giving me the stuff, and so we often had a lot of pretty heavy discussions, you know.
Yeah.
But there, as mountain communities everywhere in the world, they have this strong sense of hospitality.
Yes.
So I was safe,
Yes.
you know. But there were silly things like, you know, when I'm given a glass of vodka or something, my background is to drop it all. Yeah. And I didn't realize that they want you to leave a little bit. Because if you drop it all, it means you want more. And I was saying, no. And they were saying, oh, he's a really good guy, you know, he's showing that. Yeah. And so sometimes we get so pissed. And so obviously the arguments would get quite animated. And sometimes, you know, people would be shooting pistols into the ceiling and stuff. But, you know, there were discussions coming from the heart, open, with mutual respect.
Yes.
And a lot of these people then turned up in Italy. They didn't ask me to help them. They would turn up, work out their own lives, and then contact me.
Right, okay.
And then I'd go and visit these people living in Italy. And the Albanians, for a certain period, didn't have a great reputation. I mean, some people did get involved in gun running, drugs trafficking and everything, because when you have oral traditions that come to the fore again after a long period of not being used, some people do exploit them and use them, as, for example, in Sicily, Cosa Nostra, which comes from oral tradition, to you know, further their own ends. Most of the families I met weren't on that kind of plane, but some of them were. But I still had a situation of respect for these people because their idea of allegiance is the family. It's a clan culture. Mm-hmm. So they don't really recognize power from above. They're hugely respectful of their clan, and they wouldn't do anything to harm that clan, but people outside that clan don't have the same respect in some ways. Yeah.
Well, it's apparent from your work that you're a huge fan of human beings, really.
Yeah, I still am. You know, and I'm maybe I'm just stupid, but I still find myself loving humanity.
Yes.
You know, and I've seen some shit.
Yeah.
I've seen some shit.
China's an interesting project of yours. And again, cultural and language barriers and having to we're living in an age now where it's smash and grab photography almost, and you are kind of almost apart from that because you work long-term projects. The beauty of the long-term project is that it has balls. It has spirit. You talked about spiritual things this morning, and you said you're not sort of particularly religious, but the spiritual is obviously important to you. Yeah. And how does that? How When you went to China, how quickly did you pick up a camera and start shooting? Or was it just getting to know people first of all?
Well, in Albania, there was the language, there was Italian, and Albanian is a very different language, but I picked up quite quickly some. In China, the language is so different, even that musical element doesn't really help you. So, I mean, I've spent now altogether maybe 3 years of my life in China, so I can get by in Mandarin, which is the kind of the official language. But I was working on minorities, and these people had their own languages, etc. I was working with people always to interpret. And the strange thing in China was that I found it an advantage not being able to speak the language often.
Okay.
Because there, if I had been speaking the language, it would have required even more time to enter all these communities. So I was working with anthropologists, with Chinese photographers or filmmakers who'd been working on these subjects for a long period. So I was kind of, the strange white guy who's hanging around in the background. But it was, again, a privileged situation because I was not having to entertain in some ways. So I could sit back and then slowly I'd start using the cameras. And, people kind of, it is a question of how you are. If you come on strong to somebody, they're going to notice you. Yeah. If you're kind of sat more or less and you move with ease, people don't notice you. And, I wasn't using big SLRs. I was using small cameras with silent. Yeah. And so, so China is, in some ways, was being involved, but with a distance, a bigger distance. Right. Also because I was traveling in many peripheral areas, in Western China, Northwestern China, Xinjiang, Tibetan areas, Qinghai and Gansu, Sichuan, Yunnan, Guizhou, all these different areas where there are minorities. And there's no way I could learn all those languages. No. So I was using my Chinese colleagues, and I was, You
talked a lot about collaborative and working with filmmakers and with writers, etc. How important is that to you?
Incredibly. Because, photography, as you know, as everybody who does photography, it is a very lonely business. Yeah. You're out there with the camera and you're in your own world. So that's fine. I love that. But if you're, on a trip for 3 months, you can get depressed. I like people, so I like being around them. So actually working with people, other colleagues as well, photographers, but with people in different media, is important because, perhaps they've been working on the subject for a long time, and they can give you the background to mechanisms which would take you a lot longer to understand. It's their take. So you'll have one guy who thinks in one way, meet another guy who thinks in a different way, and then you read between the lines someplace. And from your own observation, which is only visual, then feel where it's going. Yes. And then that was one of the projects in China. The other project was the inland migration, the internal migration. Yeah. And again, I was working with universities, Beijing University of Social Sciences, different people, academics and filmmakers, etc. And so, again, I like reading stuff. I do like reading to know what I'm doing. But having the human contact of people who'd actually written those books is even better.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. Because the anthropological side of things is really fascinating. I mean, I sort of trawl through Fraser's Golden Bough occasionally to have a look at what was going on and how his mind worked, which was very strange in some respects. But you learn an awful lot about cultures, and it almost is a spark to make you want to go to some of these places. Does that happen to you with your readings? Or did you specifically say, I mean, how did Albania happen in your head?
Well, Albania happened because I came back from Central America and, the wall had come down and the last place to change was Albania. As a child, I was lucky enough to live for periods in Greece and for periods in Western Germany. And I remember visiting the Iron Curtain as a kid of 14. And it was on a river called the River Elbe, in an area called the Lüneburger Eire. And there were two bridges, and I still have a very distinct image in my head. They'd been bombed at the end of the Second World War. One was a railway, and one was a road bridge. And they'd more or less in the same situation as after they'd been bombed. And then on the other side of the river, you had this massive Iron Curtain with towers every kilometre, and then a kind of a mine area, and then a place where they'd have roads with dogs. And somehow I thought that would always be there. I just couldn't imagine. It'd been there all my life up to then. And however old you are, your life seems like a long time, even at 14. So, the shock of it actually coming down when I was 28, 29, I can't remember, was big. And, it'd all gone and I'd been stuck in the wrong place kind of thing, well, from that perspective. So, that's why Albania happened. I've travelled a lot. I covered Armenia, Azerbaijan conflict, then Nagorno-Karabakh in 93. Lots of different places. For my personal project, what happens is I start something and I get to a point where either my curiosity is satisfied or it isn't. So What I need is that, this is giving me more questions rather than answers. As long as there are questions there, then I'll carry on with it. And you do have to, at a certain point, say, stop. I have to get on to something else. But that's why I was talking today about working on several projects contemporarily. Because, it can become quite channel, vision and the rest of it. If you're working on several projects at the same time, it's like you get energy from one, then you move on to the other, and and what is important is this cycle of stuff, and that's also true from a commercial side. I mean, once upon a time, I would sell much more to magazines. Now, why should I give a magazine work of years to be paid for a lot less than what it's cost me to do that work? So unfortunately it seems to go to a more restricted kind of channel. It's the art scene and all this crap. But you can get the work out anyway. You can show the work anyway. But in order to make it viable, I mean, my thing is I started out with a pot of money. I did one project which had to make enough, or two projects, and it had to make enough money to then do the next. It's producing stuff so that you can produce stuff. Whereas the art world kind of works more and more in, we've got money, invest the money in the art to make more money.
So you would never look for grants from. Are you a grant seeker?
Well, I've had grants in the past. If people want to give me money, that's fine. If they're interested in what I'm doing, sure, why not? I mean, I've never entered competitions. I've never entered in, awards and stuff like that. Maybe that's, the final bit of being a little bit of a rebel, why work with the institution.
Absolutely.
I'm doing my own thing. And screw them, I can carry on doing it,
Philip Jones Griffiths famously said that you were a poet with a camera.
Oh yeah, well, Philip came out with some classics. I mean, he was a lovely man. He called me a Welsh poet with a camera.
Welsh poet, good. Yeah.
Great honour.
Was he a great mentor of yours?
Yeah. I didn't know about him. When I started. You know, I went to Central America and knew fuck all about photography, really.
Yeah.
I knew about the technical stuff, and then I landed up with these photographers who were very good photographers at the period. Because Nicaragua and El Salvador were, in that period, kind of covered by the medium.
Yes.
And they were the ones who were telling me, have you heard about this guy and this guy? And then some guy told me, I think it was Bill Gentile, he was a Newsweek photographer, a guy from the States. He said, have you not heard about Philip Jones Griffiths? I said, who? You know. And then when I got back to Europe, I had all this access, because then there wasn't internet and stuff. You couldn't just Google stuff.
Yeah.
I found out about this guy. I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that it took me a while, but somebody came up with some money in Italy to do a book on China. And they said, who are the people that you really like? And I was saying Philip Jones Griffiths, and I'd never met him or anything. I knew about his work at that time, you know. But I actually wrote to him saying, Philip, I'm this guy from, and this is the work I'm doing. I've something prints and stuff, and would you please consider writing an introduction to this book? And he got back, and he was so nice. Yeah. And then he came out with his stuff. And then I first met Philip after that book had been published. It showed in the National, what is Photo Gallery today.
Yeah,
but it was part of the National Museum, and then it went to several large festivals, Rome, Pingyao in China, and then I like showing work in alternative places. And I had these mates who had this thing called the Llangollen Fringe, and it was like a nice setup, you know, and they were good guys. So I showed this work there, and who turns up but Philip Jones Griffiths? Wow. And you know, I was whoa. And then we spent 2 or 3 days together, traveling around areas. He'd hired a car, traveling around areas around Trethlan, and he was, you know, I've got shivers down my spine thinking about it, and I love that man. He was a real humanist. I know he could be a pain in the ass. He was, you know, very strong in his opinions and sometimes kind of restricted in some of his ideas, but he was a fantastic human being.
Yes.
And he was inspirational for a whole lot of people. He actually helped a lot of young photographers. Yeah. And God bless him. He was big man.
A very big man. I went to see his exhibition here in Aberystwyth.
It was lovely.
And it was a beautiful exhibition. And what moved me more than anything really was the work he did in Liverpool and those areas. And that work was just sublime. It actually made me, well, not tearful, but quite emotional, you know, about, because it's that gift of being...
Well, he had a natural eye. That man had a natural eye. He was, you know, a born photographer. Yeah. I don't think I am. I kind of developed over time, but Philip had a natural eye, and he was interested in photography from a very young age.
Yeah. Know? Do you look back on some of this early stuff you were doing now? I mean... have you ever done, or are you thinking of doing a retrospective of your work?
Well, I guess, you know, I will sooner or later, but I'm still enjoying taking the images. So I am quite disciplined in what I do, but I'm not hugely disciplined in keeping the material. And I don't like spending a whole lot of time in front of screens. I'm still more interested in what I'm going to do next rather than what I've done in the past. I mean, I've got loads of projects which I've never published.
Right. Can you talk about any of those? Anything stand out in particular?
Well, yeah. I've been living in Italy for a while in different areas of Italy, and Italy is very famous for, you know, different festivals and things. There was one image I showed today was this guy standing on a cross with a megaphone. Yeah. And it's from a little festival near Bologna, Saracca, and it's religious festivals in Italy often take the piss as well. There's a whole lot going on of kind of Christian stuff. And I like that. They're ones down in Aberystwyth where they have snakes, and so they go around with a Madonna with snakes crawling all over it. And, it's really hugely theatrical. And I used to do a lot of lighting for theatre. I loved theatre, so I like theatrics as well. So that's work I've never even looked at.
Yeah,
it's all there in negatives, and I've never looked at it. I chose that one shot because I was thinking, I want one shot for which, and that came to mind, so I chose that one.
Okay. I was really interesting that your talk this morning was directed at the young people that was there.
Yeah.
How important is that passing on of?
Hugely. Because I did say today, I see photography as a language of reflection. And in an era where there are so many distractions, I think it is good that people have an opportunity to reflect. Now, if you're thinking about the images you're taking, thinking about the images you're looking at, you're reflecting on it. And so again, I mean, in a way, it's a bit this rebel thing. And I like, each generation will have new practitioners who use the technology of coming up, and they will use it better than old handers than me. So what is important is that they get their ideas of why they're doing it, what it's for, clear from start with. I'm not saying it's only my way, but I hope, I believe that there are people who will want to approach photography from that side.
Yeah.
And not just be image producers, of producing images for a market, whether it's sports. And fantastic. I mean, the talk afterwards, some of the images were amazing. I would never be able to take those images. And they're so technologically up there as well. That's not what I do. I do stuff slowly. And I think even in the future with modern technology, there will be people interested in doing it that way also. Yes. And I think it's useful.
Yeah. Staying on that point, do you think that within the education system, and lots of kids going to study photography and study photojournalism and documentary photography, what do you think of that as because you learnt on the road, you went out and did it.
Well, when I got back from Central America, I went down to Newport because I was interested in learning about stuff. And I went to see, I can't remember the name of the guy, but he was one of the, and it would have been in about 91, one of the teachers there. And I showed him some of my work, and he said, Rhodri, it's a 2-year course. You can do it in 1 year if you want, but perfectly honest, forget it. Just carry on doing what you're doing. And that was the best piece of advice I got. Then for years I thought, well, who's teaching in these courses? It's people who can't really hack it in the real world. That's not true. I don't believe that is true. Some people learn better in institutions. Some people learn better on the road. And so, some people do need more guidance, and some people don't work well under guidance. No. I was a shit student in Ysgol Dyffryn. I was one of the ones
I hated school as well,
Yeah, I mean, I left Wales. I did 2 A-levels, I think it was. I had a party that evening. I burnt all my books, something which I'm ashamed of still. But and the next day I was outside Austin Taylor's hitchhiking out of, So some people do work well, through education. Others don't. Education, it has become more and more of an industry. It's a money spinner. So not always is it designed for the students. Sometimes I feel that is true. But I'm not gonna kind of criticize it too much.
Coming back to, I mean, you spent a long time in Italy. Coming back to Wales, and you produced a book, body of work about Wales.
Yeah.
And you decided to do it in black and white,
Yeah.
and using triptychs and diptychs, etc., which is an interesting way of working anyway. But how did you find coming back? Because presumably, had you been visiting, or
I had been. I had a darkroom which had been my old bedroom in my parents' home. I converted it. And there was a period when I was traveling a lot. I would be kind of 2-3 months in one place, fly back, develop stuff, fly out, and then come back. Maybe 2-3 weeks at a time, I'd be back in Wales. And when I was back in Wales, I wasn't really in Wales. I was in a darkroom. And then I had a darkroom in Italy as well, so it depended where I was going. Coming back to a place that is interesting, and it's something which I feel there's a lot of space to be researched still, because, if you think about it, people leaving up to after the Second World War, they get a ship from Ireland or from Napoli, and, it was a one-way trip to the States. And now even the kids, who are not refugees, migrants who come from, I don't know, Burkina Faso or Mali in Italy, every 2-3 years they go home, And what I was interested in that project on Wales was how somebody going back home sees their place. Because I think there is a whole load of chemistry happening.
Yes.
And
did you become very nostalgic?
When I went to see the people down in Newport, was after I come back. The real reason that I wanted to do a course in Wales was because I wanted to photograph in Wales, okay? Yeah. And I wanted to do it before I became too nostalgic. I didn't want that nostalgia to kick in. I didn't manage to do the project until perhaps I started it maybe 10 years later. But I'd been traveling all the time, and I was, I was getting older, but I wasn't into nostalgia at all. Actually, I still am not. Mm-hmm. But whether you like it or not, age does bring nostalgia. Yeah. And you see, your friends getting older and have kids, and you're thinking, oh, Christ, and then your parents start going, and all this kind of stuff. All that kind of stuff gives you nostalgia. It's like the magma which erupts in nostalgia, and that happens to all human beings. So the project in Wales, I wanted to do it as a fairly young man, and I had to get it out of my system. I had to get it out of my system because, when you are a migrant, then you've always got this thing of, in my old age, I might go back or whatever. And I thought I would get it out of my system by doing this project. 50-50, really.
Your hinterland projects and the buildings, I actually found that really, really fascinating. And somebody brought it up in that there were no people in it. And I think that's the key to that project, is it?
Well, actually, there are portraits. I only showed the landscapes. There were portraits done. They're set up portraits, something which I hadn't done. I had to get into that because making money commercially, business people and all that, So there were portraits there. But no, the landscape itself, I wanted it to be just the buildings, just the landscape, looked at almost clinically.
Yeah, because there's not a bin in sight, is there? There's no rubbish in sight. Well, from the ones I've
there are a few of those as well. But I was actually trying to photograph these situations in as positive a light as I possibly could. My inspiration came from stuff done in the 70s in California, the Bechers, the Dusseldorf School. But also inspiration came from Google Street View. Inspiration came from these architects' computerized images. And what I wanted to do was say, okay, that's as you think it will look. This is what it actually looks like in the best possible light. and be as transparent as possible with no judgment involved. And just make sure that the image is shot in such a way that there is obviously interpretation, but it's not obvious. It's all shot on wide-angle lenses, which obviously, unless you're shooting it straight on, you'd have, lines going all over the place.
Absolutely.
So I was shooting it straight on from a height, obviously, often, depending on the situation, what height. But I could get up to 5 meters 50 on top of my van, on top of a ladder.
Yeah.
And it is wide angle, so the perspective is slightly different. The Bechers, for example, they were using long lenses, which flattens stuff up.
Yes.
So it actually makes it look nicer. I was using wide angle, which do distort, but that distortion isn't so obvious because there are no,
bendy things
going off.
Yeah.
So that was the idea behind that.
Yeah.
And as so many projects, I just started doing it and was thinking, whoa, I'm enjoying this. Yeah. And I never thought I would, but
Is there, I've got a pet sort of project in my head. I'd love to do something about pilgrimages and people who do pilgrimage because I think there's scope for huge scope. But is there any standard, is there something going on in your head at the moment that you think, I'd love to do that?
There are several things.
Name one.
No. I'll tell you why. It's not because I'm kind of being secretive or anything. It's because often I do start stuff and then feel I'm not getting anywhere with it.
Yeah.
I have to get into it and spend time on it before I think, I can spend the next couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years doing this. And then I start showing the work around, and then I start looking for, financing it and everything. To say, hey, listen, I'm working on this, and this.
No, I won't push you.
I went back to China.
Yeah.
Last year, and I started shooting kind of this hinterland thing in some ways, but with people in color, and a totally different kind of take on it. And inshallah, if I get the chance to go back to China and people invite me back, I'd like to do that. Yeah. There are other ideas that I have to spend some time on before.
And researching, I guess.
Yeah. And that is fantastic. When you start reading up stuff and you think, wow, I had no idea this was going on.
Yeah.
And then you start meeting the people involved.
Yeah.
And then you start taking the photographs, or maybe you're doing this, parallel. What better can you do in life than learn?